Welcome to Heads Up, the ISC Research series that keeps you informed of the latest trends happening in the international schools market. Although many international school teams are introducing the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion and justice into their school practices, most are yet to make any authentic, sustainable change based on deep understanding. In this episode, Nalini Cook, Head of Global Research at ISC Research, leads an important discussion on centering staff recruitment and training around DEIJ. Without further ado, let's get straight to our episode. Over to you, Nalini.
I'm delighted to be highlighting a subject that many of you know is very close to my heart: diversity, equity, inclusion and justice, also known by a variety of acronyms, including DEIJ. Now, the shift towards DEIJ in international schools has been a significant one in recent years, often as a result of the voices of LGBT and Black Lives Matter communities, as well as various other marginalised groups, and importantly, student action groups calling their schools to account. Today, DEIJ is on the radar of most, if not all, international schools. But though some schools and organisations are making strides, most international schools are still at the very earliest stages of implementation, while many others are yet to make any authentic, long-lasting change. And of course, as even those who are living a diverse and inclusive approach would testify, this is a journey that's never complete and one that remains ever evolving. DEIJ requires a vision and a mission that includes a school-wide growth mindset and an appetite for change and continual improvement that addresses all aspects of school life, not just curriculum, not just teacher recruitment, not just tokenistic change. Now, today's session brings together three highly respected panellists. I've just been fangirling over the fact that I'm getting to sit here in this virtual space with all three of them. We're going to discuss DEIJ and personal development strategies as to how we can support professional growth of international school staff. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Angeline, Estelle and Joel. Angeline Auer is Curriculum Coordinator at Berlin International School in Germany and International Advisor for the Council of International Schools. Estelle Baroun-Hughes is Incoming Secondary Principal at the International School of Dhaka and President of Africa Learning International. And Jr Llaban is the newly appointed Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Justice at International School Services. Joel also is on the Board Committee for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity and Anti-Racism at the Council of International Schools. So I'm sure you'll agree, some really experienced, knowledgeable people. Huge warm welcome to you all and thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to start with a question for all three of you. As I mentioned, and I saw you all nodding along, DEIJ needs to be a continual journey of learning and being willing to expose and respond to past mistakes. Can you briefly tell us what that looks like in your own work? Joel, if I can come to you first.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you for this wonderful space, International Schools Research Team. We're really delighted to be, I am personally very much honored to be a part of this community with Estelle and Angeline and Nalini today. And so going back to the question, while we are connected to our own schools and organizations, many of us are connected with and are members of the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color, AIELOC, because we have been living with and exposed to the violence of the unexamined powers and privileges of whiteness, white supremacy cultures, and of anti-Black and Asian hate, of colorism and casteism and sexism, as well as linguistic injustice and accentism. You know, you've got Islamophobia and patriarchy, homophobia and transphobia, identity invalidation, microaggression and erasure, gaslighting, and so many more in our physical, historical, and virtual spaces. And much of these harms live in nuance, heavily breathing in the interpersonal, while some are blatant and baked in the institutional. And so much of this violence has consequential trauma so deeply internalized and normalized that much of its working exists within us. We knowingly and unknowingly march along with the denials and damages and dangers that further reverberated the questions that Cornel West posed before. How did I become so well adjusted to injustice? And so that's the initial question that I posed to our community.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joel. Estelle, let me come to you next.
Powerful stuff, Joel. Thank you so much. The question is, how do I work with DEIJ in my work? Well, Africa Learning International, to start off with, centers the voice of and needs of African educators to ensure that their talents are visible, that their contexts are understood. We also create a bridge between international education and other educational branches. As a member of the African diaspora, working with educators on the continent, I also humbly acknowledge my blind spots, check my my savior complex when I work with my peers in Africa by moving to the listening set and lighting the amazing teachers from Africa and letting them star in the projects and conferences that are organized. Now, from talking about ISD, International School of Dakar, it's a school that's really on a journey, a DEIJ journey, centering students. I'm very respectful of the listening initiatives they've put in place and follow through from. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate our newly appointed DEIJ coordinator, Ajasako, and to congratulate also our very first DEIJ coordinator, Dr. Nika Johnson, who started these listening sessions, who led to centering the voices of non-teaching staff within international schools, because we are communities not only student-centered, but human-centered. We have to hear the voices of everybody within the international school branch.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nalini.
Thanks very much. And Angeline, let me pass over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me into this great space. And yeah, just hearing from Joel, I think he's really outlined how society itself is not equitably designed, right? And schools are a reflection of society. And schools, I think, also are an opportunity for us to also help shape what society will look like in the future. And so I think when we inherit these institutions, we inherit the her stories, the values and beliefs and the cultural norms that exist within schools. And so if we want to build on and make progress, I think we're asking people to shift a previously accepted state of being. And so it's more than just kind of bringing to light past harm and making a public response. I think we really need a commitment to transform schools into becoming totally inclusive, and by really having strategies to address the mindsets and behaviors and also the systems and structures that exist within them. And so you asked, what does this look like in our organizations? And so I work at Berlin International School, and for us, this is really an integral part of the way in which we reflect and plan the work that we do with our students. So we are a IB-PYP school, so everything is integrated into our units of inquiry, and in the primary we collaborate all the time, and so we're constantly having these conversations that stretch us, and so we need to capitalize on those learning and development opportunities. And then at the Council of International Schools, where I also work in the global citizenship team to develop DEIJ materials, it's really listening to educators and school leaders from CIS's membership community. And because, as Estelle mentioned, we have understanding gaps. And we need to really center the voices of those that have been historically marginalized, so that we can really respond to those needs and create learning opportunities, such as the IDEA Foundation workshop that we've just had in May, and that we'll repeat again in September.
Thank you. There's already so much to unpack from the three of you, but I'm going to I've got a couple of pre-prepared questions, as you're aware, so I'm going to start with those and let's see how our discussion evolves. Estelle, let me come to you first. I think Angeline touched on it there, where she said that school is a reflection of society. Can you expand on that? Why do you think DEIJ matters so much for the international school sector? Why is it important that we're here highlighting it today?
Yes, I think as Angelique say, DEIJ is a reflection of society. It is also a reflection of history. International education was basically built in a colonial context, very elitist, and a very exclusive branch. So we made this happen, centering one set of cultures, excluding others intentionally. So it is time to undo this work, all as intentionally as it was done. We need to undo it. So there has been, of course, the beginning of the conversation is with us, but we need to continue because we still see these ads with, native speaker or French teacher, studied in France, posted all over international education career website. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it has to be done, to sum it up, as intentionally as it was undone, as intentionally as it was done.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're all familiar with those types of adverts and some of the things that Joel's highlighted earlier. Joel, let me come back to you. You highlighted perhaps some of the challenges, some of the things that we should all be aware of. What advice do you have for international school leaders about acknowledging and embracing a need for change? Where would you suggest a school begins? Because it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, thanks, Nalini. Really, to me, it's very much connected to the context that were shared by Estelle and Angeline today. And then in addition to that, there's also starting with an understanding that we live in a racialized, white-centered, white norm world. And that is deeply, historically, and currently harmful. Michelle Mi-Jung Kim, author of The Wake Up, wrote, white supremacy wants us to believe there are simple, efficient, and I would add to that linear and binary solutions to complex problems, thereby encouraging us to prematurely ditch the necessary grappling when we can't find a simple solution to a problem at hand. So where we start is that do not skip the stage of interrogation of inequity in your own communities in aid of white comfort. You have to ask the hard questions. We need to name the inequities for us to define equity. And so our collective anti-racist radical dream has to be in every educator's and institution's moral imperative. We have to use our powers and privileges as levers for change. And in white-centered institutions like the international school, we need to examine what Bettina Love had looked into that one, into the whiteness at the center of the reproduction of structural inequality. And Bettina Love, the author of We Want to Do More Than Survive, wrote that white folks truly concerned about understanding racism, about being in solidarity with dark folks, with BIPOC, with people of the global majority, about building community. And folks who are interested in intersectional justice have to start learning about whiteness and how it functions. It is also for all of us, including dark folks, BIPOC, people from the global majority, and to really look into resisting that continuous subscription to the pressures and pleasures of our internalized superiority and to the harmful narratives of dominant cultures and identities that we have sort of internalized and inherited. And so contrary to that isolated work of doing equity, there's this equity work championed by equity warriors. That's what Dr. Jamila Dugan had mentioned before. This moral imperative must be the bedrock for schools as we aim for educational justice. And I would like to invoke the words of a dear friend, Ceci Gomez-Galvez. She's a thought leader in linguistic justice. She shared her radical dream around equitable and inclusive practices become foundations of how educational systems are built. And it's not to have to be something that we talk about separately from what already exists, but rather the norm of how we build and design learning experiences. I think really we have to go back to that idea of questioning ourselves. What messages did we receive as children that were affirming and invalidating when we were growing up, when we were socialized, and then transforming that into our own schools and in organizations and asking ourselves, what messages do we think our children now receive from us that are affirming and invalidating? And I think starting from those would really be hopefully powerful and impactful for your teams.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, that obviously goes not just for, I think we all come at this, everybody sitting here in this panel today, we do come at this from a people of the global majority. And if you haven't heard that terminology before, that is a preferential term to saying ethnic minorities. But this obviously also holds true for people of from an LGBTQ background, from in terms of neurodiversity. There are so many ways that there is a norm, a typical stance on things, and we have to work much harder to include everybody so they have that space of belonging. Angeline, what advice do you have for curriculum and qualification providers, content creators, about decolonizing the curriculum and learning content, making it that bit more inclusive for all of those people? Do those people, creators, content providers, etc., do they have a part to play in DEIJ, or is it simply down to the teachers?
Through conversations I've had with educators and also with alumni groups who are doing work to decolonize and to push institutions that are, curriculum creators and authorizers and also accrediting bodies. And I think to begin with, and Joel said that we need to interrogate inequity, and I think a part of that is really actually being clear on what we mean by decolonizing. Because I think one of the most common things that happens in schools is people say, well, I'm decolonizing the curriculum, and they're actually increasing representation of diverse perspectives, and maybe infusing the curriculum with, female voices or people of color, LGBTQ plus voices. And this is increasing representation, right? But has one actually truly decolonized the curriculum frameworks itself? And so, because for me, I think decolonizing a curriculum is about changing how we think about learning and teaching, and the way in which we have been enculturated to value certain ways of knowing and certain ways of valuing knowing, also in the way in which we assess. And so I think that providers you need who and I work for CIS and which provides an accreditation process where we're striving to shape the future of international education. And so whatever values that the we have at CIS, it's going to underpin everything that we do in our organization. So if you are a provider, if you're a researcher like ISC is as well, what are the values driving you that's going to shape the questions that you put out to research, for example? And also because essentially, the values that drive that can accelerate or impede this DEIJ progress work. And so I think that, for example, look at what happened with child protection when there was a united task force. It meant that schools, had to comply more quickly, because if you wanted authorization or accreditation from a curricular framework or an accrediting body, if you didn't like one, you couldn't turn to another one that maybe you thought had more favorable conditions, because everyone was working together on that, right? And so and I also think that we could do that better. And the same needs to happen for DEIJ, because I believe that not only do they have a part to play in this, but there needs to be more interagency collaboration and sponsorship of this work on a global scale.
Thank you. Yeah, some really, really valuable points there. And I think perhaps knowing our audience today and knowing that people are coming from not just schools, but education providers, suppliers, etc. as well, not only is it important that we talk about things like decolonizing and the inclusivity of curriculum and content, but also just the fact that we reflect, as you said, ISC, we're a researcher, but we, just like every other organization, it's important that everybody reflects on what's going on in their own organizations and what's underpinning their own work. Estelle, I'm interested in your take on whether an international school can successfully deliver learning through an anti-racist and inclusive lens without having a diverse cohort of both teachers and leaders. we know that the reflection of staff at international schools isn't necessarily as diverse as it perhaps ought to be. Can international schools still be successful in delivering diverse learning?
Short answer for me is no. The human brain learns a lot through mimesis. So I would say that approach of do what I say and don't do what I do isn't working for the children. And what we are potentially creating is a bunch of cynics rather than a bunch of change makers. But now we have to ask ourselves what diversity really is. In the context of international education, the branch is more and more differentiated between the traditional non-for-profit international schools and for-profit, more recent international schools that are more grounded in communities. In my countries, in my country, for example, there's a multiplication of Cameroonian international schools where a lot of Cameroonian teachers and Cameroonian students attending. What does diversity mean in this context? Do we need to have more white people coming to the school? That's when you refocus yourself on what diversity means within your context. It could be linked to culture, to language, to all sorts of different aspects of social life. So all in all, I think that it's important to, first of all, in each context, define what diversity means, and then, make sure that we intentionally open the student's mind to cultural diversity, to intellectual diversity. And one area that I particularly enjoy discussing diversity around is global citizenship. For me, for example, I wonder, where is Ubuntu in global citizenship? We have very Western research based on our analysis of global citizenship, when we can learn a lot from people on the ground by talking to non-teaching staff and looking at how they interact with children. As Angeline was saying, decolonizing international education is about changing the way you think. And that's the basis of nurturing diversity as well. It's about looking at what is around you and adopting the host country's approaches to things sometimes, adopting a new approach to thinking, to teaching, to learning. Start by diversifying your brain and your staff. And the children will see that and become more open-minded.
Thank you. No, it's I think the really important takeaway for me from what you've just said is essentially something we all need to be doing, but it's got to be within your own context. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach across the globe. Now, Joel, furthering that question of who should perhaps be standing at the front of the classroom, we know that many schools say that the greatest challenge for achieving staff diversity is addressing those preconceived ideas from parents about international school teachers and what they should be, and that they want somebody who is perhaps white or Western or native English speaker. In fact, I've had those very conversations in the last couple of months with school leaders. So I know it's really common, and I know that schools have a bottom line, but how do you suggest schools begin to address this with parents?
Yeah, and this really goes back to the impactful message that Estelle shared earlier around decolonizing our own thinking as well. It has to start within ourselves and our system. I think we need to start reflecting the way we think about our ideologies, and we cannot continue as well to keep keeping the parents collateral or hostage to this work. They rely on us to understand why this work matters to their children, and so we have to take accountability as schools and organizations in education, in educating them when we have the growing and evolving clarity within ourselves and our system. So we need to define and reimagine the why of international education. And I think it was also shared by Angeline earlier, or education in general. It's whiteness, it's heteronormativity, it's sexism, it's classism, coloniality, neurodiversity, and all of the other things, or the lack of neurodiversity. And these are the things that sustain it. So leaning into what Kevin Simpson inspired us to ask ourselves as we radically dream, he asked about what if. What if we educate the leaders in our schools, governance and administration, leaders in the classroom, our educators, and leaders of families, parents and caregivers, around colonized mindsets and white supremacy ideologies, for all of us to acknowledge, rewire, dismantle our collective racist ideologies, and radically reimagine and transform them into beliefs that success, strengths, creativity, beauty, power, achievement, leadership, joy, and genius can also emanate from and inhabit in the minds and bodies of Black, brown, women, neurodivergent, and queer bodies.
Thank
So
you.
that these
Yeah.
don't only live in white male cisgender bodies. So we all get to truly understand the power of having diverse identities in our organizations and communities. And to me, in continuation to that, Nalini, it's really around that reimagined socialization for ourselves and our system. First, in order to that clarity for our parents, because parent communities in our national schools, specifically in former and neo-colonized countries, have this ingrained subscription to whiteness. And it has been the value proposition of international education because it sells. Mm-hmm. It's marketable. It is this dance between consumers and product, right? So until leaders reimagine this business model of what parents want to what students truly need, can we only move closer to a radical dream of diversity, of healing, of authenticity, of agency, of equity and justice. And so when you ask ourselves, why diversity? There's always this question, why do we need to diversify? Students will see themselves when they get to see others. More specifically, students of diverse identities, or Black, brown, neurodivergent, queer folks, will see more of their worth when they see this worth in the adults who look like them in the community.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Angelina, I'm going to bring you in really as an extension to what Joel's response to that question was. I mean, in your opinion, what beliefs and values of parents need shifting really to facilitate DEIJ in international schools?
Thanks, Nalini and Joel. I really valued what you said about this idea of really needing to shift this educational contract that we have now and we understand to be, it's a real socialized agreement that we have between schools and parents, that this is what we understand that they want and that they need, right? But at the same time, I think that what we've had to date is like I mentioned before, is a reflection of what is inequitable in society. And so our schools have also been designed inequitably. And so I think we need to, that old contract needs to be renegotiated, and we need to co-construct one together in partnership with parents, because parents are also representative of the global majority and are likely also not reflective of the if you have a really non-diverse staff. Yeah, and so I think that they are the voices that we need to stop using as an excuse, or because there's a difference between reasons and excuses. And I think for too long, we have said, okay, but this is what the parents want. Is it really what the parents want? Or is it the vocal parents that is also part of a minority? Because likely, and statistically, your parent community is also consisting of a global majority. Yeah. And so are we actually then centering, whose voices are we centering when we say this is what the parents want? And also, I think, do we stop there by saying, well, this is what the parents want, by not going back and thinking and saying, well, I've identified the issue then, so now what am I going to do about it? Because this is what the parents want. It puts that responsibility back on someone else. And I don't think that's good enough. Because essentially, I think if you ask any parent, they will want their child to be happy, healthy, and successful. And the notion of success varies across cultures and contexts. So as what Estelle said about things need to be contextualized and how we define it in our own schools and institutions across the globe, it's really important. And the reality is that we functioned in, somewhere where the dominant culture has been rooted in those histories and that Joel mentioned. Right. And so I think growing up with these messages, like myself as an educator, the parents have grown up with all of these messages coming out at them. Those cultural norms have really screamed really loudly at us, and they have indoctrinated us to think about what does it mean to be successful. And so I think that when we want to shift what parents think about that, we need to recognize that what parents have believed to be successful is things like learning English, having connections and opportunities to have pathways to Ivy League universities, perhaps, or that academic success is seen as being able to be economically successful in the future. And also in order to gain all of that we need to assimilate into the spaces that's going to help us get there. Right. And so we need to dismantle all of those beliefs. Yeah, because those beliefs have only served a minority. And if we truly believe that parents with their children can come into our school communities as they are without having to then assimilate into cultures that we have been a part of creating, as Estelle mentioned earlier, that we are responsible for this. We were part of making this, and so then I think that's really important that it's also for us to then facilitate those conversations with parents to shift beliefs so that we can start to dismantle it together.
Thank you so much, Angeline. I'll come back to you after we've spoken to Estelle. Where could international schools leadership start to include parents and students in their decisions? Because I think that segues very nicely with what you've just been talking about. But I'll give you a moment to ponder on that. Estelle, also connected, I'd like to hear your thoughts on really what advice do you have for school leaders on ensuring that marginalized students and staff have as much of a voice as others do in the school community? Angeline's just been talking there that, it's not necessarily reflective of the school community, but those voices aren't actually necessarily heard. What's your advice?
Thank you. I was thinking about nurturing. I was talking about nurturing cynicism rather than change. This harms the students and the community members who are physically, culturally, and hierarchically isolated, undervalued, and misrepresented within the school, within the curriculum, etc. So that's the base of the base of the reflection is actually this understanding. I think we really need to challenge the concept of fitting in when inviting people into our community. That might lead to, if you're always focusing on, this is a good fit for the team, that leads to recruiting your own clones, basically. You need to go for excellence in all of its forms. You need also to discard the false dichotomy between diversity and quality. Diversifying your staff and leadership is not a threat to quality in your institution. As you uphold the criteria for excellence and refer to it, lack of diversity, on the other hand, leads to less quality, and research has supported that. In the world today, leaders need to challenge the proverbial, this is how we've always done this. So look at the qualifications that you demand, the career profiles that you relish, recruit for potential, and train each other. Because the diverse person who is being recruited, even though I don't like the term diverse in this context, but the person who has been invited in to enrich the community has got as much to bring as much to receive. So there's a mutual training going on there. So I think we need to embed DEIJ in recruitment, in professional learning, in school life, in ways that we truly acknowledge the equal value of all human beings, and that excellence looks different in different cultures, and we need to learn from other cultures how excellence can look like within our schools.
Thank you. Yeah, really, really important. And I loved what you said there about recruit for potential. It's not everybody has had the advantage of the same experiences, opportunities, etc. I think that just learning to scratch a little bit below the surface and see people's potential is really important one. Angeline, was there anything you wanted to add there in terms of school leadership, including parents and students in those decisions, or indeed in their processes?
For me, I think that I kind of think for leaders, where could you not? Because I think that if we really need to understand, because the school, we're there to provide an educational service, right? And so in order to do that in the best way possible to serve the community, we need to understand what our community is. And communities change and shift. I know that, for example, at my school, at Berlin International School, the city of Berlin has changed so much in itself. So we have a lot more South Asians coming to work in startups in Berlin. And so, it's shifted our community and who comes in. And so we need to constantly be in communication and dialogue with our parents. And I think that I love my primary school principal. She does this really, really well. And I think what she does is that she builds a foundation of trust with parents. And without that foundation of trust, you can't have any conversation about any new initiative that you want to bring in, whether it be, tech, increasing the, how we use integrated technologies, or whether it's changing your language policy so that it's more equitable, or whether it's bringing in DEIJ style initiatives. All right. And so that foundation of trust, and so having conversations and also questioning and maybe mapping out who has voices in your schools, and voices do we hear a lot from. And I think my principal also models that really well, because she recognizes and says our school population has a lot of Japanese and Korean families. However, we don't hear from them as often as we hear from others. So how can we reach out to them, and how do they network differently? And so I think really understanding and building up your intercultural skills in that is really, really important. And so I think we need to start everywhere. And it's my kind of long-winded answer.
No, that's perfect. I think, it's so important to highlight all of these things. Joel, certainly, we've been talking about some quite explicit issues that people are coming across in terms of various things, recruitment, curriculum, etc. You alluded at the very beginning in our introduction to the concept of unconscious bias. It's a common challenge, and we all have it. There isn't a single person in the world who doesn't have unconscious bias. But does change need to begin at a leadership level? Should we be simply relying on people self-evaluating? How can this awareness of unconscious bias be achieved, especially for perhaps those leaders who don't see or want to see the need for change?
Yeah, thanks, Nalini. We have noticed unconscious bias becoming sort of buzzwords for learning about DEIJ. And while I value the entry point learning in reflection around unconscious bias and intercultural competencies, I think it is one of the many entry points. It's only the beginning. And sometimes it only leaves us confirming our denials and adaptation to a culture, which in itself, the definition of culture there is very much white-centric. But we have not find dominance in culture and the harm that undergirds it. Whose culture are we adapting to? Who's adapting? Why adaptation? What are the power imbalance? So we cannot be hiding behind the veils of unconscious bias and get back to business. It's really about the need to be conscious about our biases, to acknowledge and put a language on our racist ideologies. So if we are to transform systems, we need to ask ourselves the hard questions. What are the racist and sexist ideologies that we hold? How do these ideologies get metabolized into harmful interpersonal and institutional actions? What are the white supremacist, racist ideologies that are bedrocks of inequities in our systems? And then what systemic change must be done that really ensure that we hold accountability to it? So yes, leaders have to take ownership of this work. And there are tons of educators doing this work. Leaders in the classroom, we call them, challenging and interrogating and disrupting status quo. But we also have noticed that leaders are barriers to this work, because many of them consider this as a personal attack to their maleness and whiteness. So remember that this is not a cancellation of white male identities. We need anti-racist white male leaders and educators who are upstanders and traitors of systems of oppression, because white children are watching you lead this transformation. You are the model in coalescing and co-conspiring with BIPOC educators and leaders.
Yeah, really, really important that this is not it's not an attack on anybody. It's simply an opportunity for us all to widen our horizons, experience, etc. Now, that's leadership. Angeline, what about the coal face of it as such? You know, people working in classrooms, teachers who, you know, certainly in the last 2 years has been you know, a roller coaster for everybody. There are a lot of pressures on teachers in classrooms all over the world. But if teachers are not trained and continually developed, their own bias, even if it's unconscious bias, does impact the next generation and just self-perpetuates then. So how can schools ensure DEIJ is happening in every classroom with every teacher without, you know, sort of loading their shoulders with too much extra work?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question, and you know, my part of my role is being a pedagogical leader, and so really helping people transform and think about the pedagogy that they're designing in the learning and teaching in the classrooms. And sadly, I don't think I could ever ensure anything because this is a human profession, and we're dealing with a lot of people who there are things within our control and things we can influence, and then some things that we need to maybe accept. And I think for very long, teachers have existed in a space where something has been acceptable, and what has been acceptable was not always equal for every identity in the classroom. And so what we're asking for is to changing and raising the bar and thinking about, well, what does an equitable classroom look like? What does a classroom look like where all identities are valued and are treated with dignity and worth, right? And so I think those conversations need to happen in every school. And because you need to define that together with the teachers and have their voices and understandings represented there, because without them shifting their beliefs and values, that's not going to happen. And so together you need to create clarity about what that looks like before you can have accountability. And I think in the clarity that your school needs to have are questions like, you know, what are the capabilities teachers need to have and to develop to bring this work forward? You know, what are the expectations of teachers that we have to uphold DEIJ values? And is there a commitment from the board and leadership that visibly sponsors DEIJ and lives these values themselves in their own actions and decision making? Because then that's that accountability piece in your school, right? And so they're thinking now, well, how do teachers then are expected to perhaps show evidence of what they are doing, continuously learning? Can we find evidence of that in our planners or in documentation of student learning and portfolios? Can we see that in the walls? Can we see that in the culture that's happening? As you walk around the school, you know, you see teachers behaving in ways that you think are really respectful and treating everyone with dignity. And so I think, you know, what happens with a teacher can, you know, obviously can cause harm, or it can really be a force that says that this harm's not acceptable. And but I think we all need to be very clear and to be able to kind of find ways in which to monitor, document, measure, report, and celebrate things when things are really working well, and to also be able to then build on those strengths that you may have in your community for what that learning and teaching looks like. So the clarity before accountability, really, and the work that needs to be done needs to be individual, intrapersonal, and also institutional.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I like clarity before accountability, but also that there should be support and celebration of good work that's being done. You touched there very briefly on perhaps the accountability towards a board. Estelle, you know, we know from experience in schools that leadership changes, people move on into new roles. How do you ensure this continuum of improvement when leadership roles are changing, when indeed even teachers are changing on a regular basis? Is it ultimately the responsibility of the board or the governing body? And if so, you know, what's your message to them? How are they accountable?
Thank you for an excellent question, Nalini. I want to refer to a saying from my village: food tastes better when you eat it together and with your fingers. When you think about why people eat together in Africa, it's because it creates a feeling of harmony, and it's also a space where you learn how to position yourself, how to pace yourself, how to share, you know, and also how to enjoy. And as you have these meals together, you are looking forward to the next because the experience is so positive, and you adjust your attitude and your pace to others. I think this is a brilliant metaphor for DEIJ work. We do it together, then it becomes meaningful as we engage. If one person leaves the meal, the community is still there and it's still engaging and will still be there tomorrow to continue that exchange. If you are building DEIJ programs that are from top to the bottom, often what happens, you do something that my grandfather's called scratching, where there's no itch. You know, you are just imposing your own idea, and as soon as you're gone, it's gone. So co-building interdependently, of course, but also very subtly, not keep it only to the intellectual. You have to stimulate the emotions. You have to stimulate the senses. You have to bring in this different sports, these different foods, these different ways of interacting, of thinking, of doing things together, things that don't necessarily seem spontaneously logic to you. When you do it together as a community, it lasts longer. So I hope that in the schools where I work, I managed to create that feeling of togetherness, of emotional connection, and of respecting of everybody's pace and need.
Thanks. Yeah, embedding that togetherness is really underpins all of that. What a nice way of putting that, though. I love that saying. Food tastes better when you eat it together. What a lovely thing to take away. Joel, I'm going to ask you one last question from my list. We talked very briefly there about accountability, perhaps in the context of boards and the school community. But how else can international schools make themselves accountable for their DEIJ progress, their journey, in a way that supports continued growth and change? How can they check in and make sure that this is an ongoing process, not just something that is flavor of the month?
Yeah, Anjali and Estelle alluded to many of these. So we treat DEIJ as a school-wide systemic innovation and transformation we do at schools, mind, body, and spirit. You know, you define your why, you develop systems and structures that have accountability measures that are co-created, centering BIPOC leadership, people from the global majority of leadership, and voices with the margin. I think it's a pathway moving forward. Schools need to engage in an intentional and honest reflection, you know, a gathering of street data from the works of Dugan and Safir, and that deep listening about the depths of our individual and systemic identities and the harms of othering and who we see and think when we say, you belong here. You know, what does it mean? We listen to the stories in our community so we don't we also don't have to fall into the trap of suspending judgment and be non-judgmental. We need to be judgmental on racism and sexism. If our schools truly commit to belonging, then we need to have all of our identities and stories in the depths of our classrooms and libraries, unquestioned and undenied. And I think when you talk about international education, the reasons and relevance of international education's existence, and Estelle alluded to a bit of that history as well before, we need to look into the reimagined essence and the shifts of our purpose, informed by our context and sustained by the diversity of our people. It must be centered in that community's radical dreaming, in order for us to come to a realization that as international schools, perhaps we have to transcend from being a white-centered system with exclusive attachment to white and Western epistemologies, and evolve and expand into learning communities with wide encompassing intersectional identities, bringing in stories from different ways of living, learning, and loving. Perhaps only then we can truly claim internationalism that is more responsive and relevant and impactful to the world beyond the elite walls we're in. And to that kind of world we envision for adults and children, especially for Black and Brown and adult children, to belong, to matter, to thrive, and to succeed. And I think it goes back to the concept of how do we see this one as a transformative process that we need to take accountability together. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, very much. Thank you. Thank you for that, Joel. Pia asked about thoughts on introducing DEIJ related KPIs for school leaders. In other industries, she says, it's clear that unless diversity and inclusion directly impacts a higher ups compensation package, the change we want to see rarely happens. Do you think this can apply to international schools as well? Ooh, any thoughts?
Why not? KPIs are one way of doing things. I feel that not many schools are familiar with the KPI approach, key performance indicator, because education is a different type of, there's some appraisal approaches are less dry than KPIs in most schools. I would say maybe that's been my experience, but there are some schools using these. I feel that there are other approaches that will be less threatening, maybe, because we do not always achieve deep change through threatening measures. I think that we have to, like Plato was saying, no one is doing anything wrong and nasty. It's just really that we don't understand what we are doing. So for me,
Right.
This is an educational challenge rather than a consequential, a challenge of consequences and punishment. That would be my approach.
It's a really, really good point. Did anybody else want to weigh in on that, or shall I move along?
Just briefly, Nalini.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think, when we're thinking about, how we measure what capabilities look like, I think, this can be quite difficult. But I also wanted to say, like, along the same lines of that, is that, business world, they've also had things like quotas. And because for so long things have not made progress, and then and quotas have actually maybe accelerated how quickly things might achieve a certain number or equitable measure. And so, yeah, I just want to throw it out there that maybe also that could be a way of accelerating progress.
Yeah, good point. Very much so. And we certainly see that going on in some countries. I know certainly where I am in the Gulf, there are quotas coming in, and that that has its own issues as well. There are it's not cut and dried and super easy, but certainly another approach. What does justice look like in countries that don't have laws that support anti-racism policies, and or worse, perpetuate racism, discriminatory practices within the culture? It's such a good question when you perhaps have a school, a leadership team, your teachers, parents, everybody's supportive of this, but actually the governing laws of the country prevent you from being as inclusive as you might want to be. What have you seen in such situations, Joel, Angelina, Estelle? are there any ways around this, or things that people can do to at least try and mitigate some of these things, whilst remaining law abiding? I must state, I'm not advocating that people break the law.
I think it's very important that we understand what the laws are, and sometimes I think, you know, especially if I find that in international schools, quite often someone who's brought in to lead it is not necessarily from that country, right? And so it's really important that you understand, you know, what do you have control of? But then work within those parameters to think, well, I still have an entire school culture that I can influence. All right. And so then thinking about, you know, like there are things that you can influence, and you can establish that this is what safeguarding means in our school. Even and within, you know, the parameters that you have for whatever the law is. And because I think when things do get tricky, like say if incidents happen in schools, and then you're thinking about but there's a very long path before it becomes sort of like a criminal thing where it gets reported and things. And before it gets to that stage, there are also all of the different behaviors that happen and the cultural norms that we accept and don't accept. And like, for example, you know, locker room talk about, and that perpetuates some toxic masculinity, or it could be microaggressive you know, behaviors that's not micro for the person receiving them, right? And so all of that we can influence and have control over. So, and then that itself is going to shape the culture that you want within your school.
The really important points. You have a lot of agency within your school four walls as such, and there are certainly things that can be influencing the next generation to elevate their own practices. I'm conscious of time. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to have to bring it towards a close, but quick fire round, quick question for each of you. Angeline, question for you. If you could recommend one book to read that helps open people's eyes to the impact of inequity and injustice, what would you suggest?
I'm going to suggest a book that I have loved, and I know Joel loves as well, and he's mentioned it earlier, The Wake Up by Michelle Mi-Jung Kim. As I was researching to write my own book that will come out in November 2022 called Becoming a Totally Inclusive School. That was the best resource I had. I have tapped into it throughout, and it's really valuable because it talks about closing the gap between, you know, good intentions and real change. And I do fundamentally believe that everyone turns up to schools with good intentions, and we need to unpack what good is and redefine it. And I think this book will help everyone get there.
Thank you. Thanks for the recommendation. Estelle, who have you been following on social media this year who shares good advice, good practice about DEI change in the school sector?
In the school sector, not specifically in the school sector. I want to mention maybe Rishika Tullian and Jodianne Borey's work, but my absolute favorite one is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie with her African Roots and Global Wings, that shows for me the path of excellence. And obviously, I've been focused specifically on school. Let's say I've been with ILOC sessions on all sorts of different issues that touch with DEIJ.
Yeah, super. Thanks. I second, third, fourth AIELOC's work there. Joel, finally, whose voice do you recommend international school leaders are listening to or should read?
This is not going to be a quick fire. There's a lot, because a lot of community voices and leaders are working at the moment. And But to me, it's like thinking about it, to read, you've got Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, you've got We Want to Do More Than Survive, Bettina Love, Street Data by Shane Saphir and Jamila Dugan, The Wake Up, Angeline mentioned that, All About Love by Bell Hooks. We've got Ratchetdemic, Reimagining Academic Success by Christopher Emden, Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria, Growing Up in Transit by Dr. Danal Tanu, My Grandmother's Hands, that talks about racialized trauma by Risma Mikanem. And in terms of people in international schools and at AIELOC, you've got folks like Marla Hunter, Kevin Simpson, Daniel Wickner, Cheryl Ann Weeks, Nayong Weaver, Tawana Merritt, Cheryl Spellick, Aaron Robinson, Rama Diay, Gary Gray, Narine Romani, Darnell Fine, Shwetanga Chakrabarti, Ceci Gomez Galvez, Tunana Nyomi, Tanay Naik, Natasha Krishna, Dolene Dorimana, Jessica Wang, Alan Fan, Nika Johnson, Nadine Richards, Margaret Park, Kristen Penelgot, Angeline Ewan Estelle, who are here today, Yvette Santos Cuenco, Dr. Jose Medina, women of color in ELT, and so many more, Black, brown women, queer folks in education. But I also would like to mention our white co-conspirators. We've got Kathleen Nagley, Emily Meadows, Trisha Friedman, Liz Duffy, and Dana Watts, who have been with us in our own community, and to all of you as well at ISC. So thank you for this opportunity to be in community with everybody today. Yeah.
Thanks. That was such a fantastic list. Now, I know nobody will have had time to write all of that down. I know I've certainly, in the last 2 minutes, generated a huge reading list, which will probably see me through the next 6 months or so. Thanks everyone so much for joining us. Thank you so much to Angeline, Joel, Estelle. Thank you very, very much.
For more information about Heads Up, including access to previous episodes, please visit iscforschools.com/headsup. Until next time.